Welcome into the very first edition of the College Football Power Hour. Fitz, we made it.
Yeah, we did.
It's week 0. Caroline Fenton, Jason Fitz, and we're here for the very first edition of the College Football Power Hour. We will be officially launching on Tuesday, August 27th. You can find us YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You can also check us out online at sports.yahoo.com. But we're here. College football is finally happening. After all of the changes and the conference realignment and the 12-team playoff, we lived and we made it through.
We're about to live the most exciting and unprecedented year in college football history. And for everybody that sat here and lamented expansion for how long, I will remind everybody that now, if your favorite team loses in week 0 or week 1, hope is not lost, right? We're going to see a different level of attention to college football in November, in December, for teams that, in the SEC, you live in SEC country. I lived there for a long time. For teams in the Big Ten and these stacked conferences, they're going to be fighting all the way through the end of the year, trying to get that wild card spot. This is going to be the most insane year. And we should give Adam Brenneman credit. He's our third member. He's Casper the Friendly Ghost. He's not here with us now, but hey, Adam's going to be part of this fun too. I'm looking forward to this show this year because there's so much weird stuff to get into.
There's so much anticipation, and I think we all at this point in the college football season need to wipe away our memory of everything that we thought that we knew about the college football playoff, everything that we thought we knew about the importance of conference championship games, because all of that is changing. Now we live in a college football world where if you are a college football playoff contender, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're a national championship contender. Never has that happened in college football history. So what we're here to do today is get everybody prepped and primed and ready for the college football season. There's a lot of talking. I love talking season. I love gossip. I love talking about who's way overhyped. I love talking about the weird and niche teams in the group of 5 that we don't talk about enough. I love some good action.
You said niche? This is our first philosophical debate. Can a guy, niche or niche? I don't know, because I'm not a niche guy. I can't
You're
be
a niche guy.
I'm a niche guy.
There's no T in it.
Well, but okay, but phonetically is not spelled phonetically. The very word phonetically, it starts with a PH. So
that's
I
fair.
don't know how I'm supposed to feel.
You always keep that one in your back pocket. I am sure of that. I'm sure that's not going to be the first or the last time that you hear that out of you.
Niche.
Niche. It sounds a little bit more French, a little bit more fancy.
You are fancier than I am. We can establish that early on. Niche is very Caroline, niche is very me.
And that's what you're going to learn to learn here on the program. Niche, fancy, who's not fancy.
Yeah, that's fair. All right, so who's overrated then? Now that we've got, because niche underrated, but niche overrated. So who is overrated?
So overrated, in my opinion, I'm going to have to give it to the USC Trojans for a few reasons. It's not just about, okay, how does USC enter into this territory of life after Caleb Williams? It's not just about, oh my gosh, USC's defense was absolute and total and complete trash last year. It's also about the new territory that USC is entering into the Big Ten. If you look at Lincoln Riley's history back at Oklahoma and the past couple of years at USC, they don't play a lot of defense. I know that Lincoln Riley moved on from Alex Grinch and they bring in a new defensive coaching staff. But in the Big Ten, if you cannot play defense, you will not survive when you're going up against the defensive lines at Michigan or in Ohio State and Iowa. I know the offense is brutal, but that defense is something special. So I don't think that USC is going to be able to survive in the Big Ten without playing at least adequate and average defense. That's not something that Lincoln Riley's teams have done in the past.
I think it's important to note, too, because, yes, they may change. But I say this all the time, whether we're talking about college football or the NFL. The very people that made the change are the people that made the decision before. So before we give Lincoln Riley all sorts of benefit of the doubt that he solved it, let's acknowledge that the problem he had at the defensive coordinator position was the problem he created by who he brought in, right? So I'm with you on that. And it'll also be interesting to see. I'm not sure I'll say they're overrated, but I will say this. It's going to be interesting because I don't think Lincoln has necessarily taken steps to ingratiate himself with the local LA community, with the local LA press. I don't think that there's a lot of love on the West Coast for Lincoln Riley. If things start to go awry for USC, I wonder how long it will take before the pitchforks are out and USC fans are just absolutely losing their mind, which comes back to where we started this whole thing. That's the chaos we're going to get this year, right? Because there's a difference between being the pretty program on the West Coast that can handle it versus now you got to muck it up. You got to get ugly with the Big Ten. It could get ugly.
If the USC higher-ups didn't pay his buyout at Oklahoma and give him that fancy pants, millionaire mansion in LA and
nice
pay
house.
him a very nice house, hey, Lincoln, if you're listening, I'd love to come over, even though I said your team's overrated. Sorry about that.
We'll talk about it. At the pool.
Maybe have some brisket.
Yeah.
But they didn't pay him $100 million a year to go 9-3 or 8-4, miss out on the Big Ten championship game, miss out on the college football playoff, and surely not miss out on the opportunity at a national championship. Like, there are very high expectations at that football program for very good reason. So for me, overrated goes to Lincoln Riley and USC. Fitz?
So overrated is how much I care about my Menchies, because I'm about to say this and it's just going to destroy me on social media. Overrated, Alabama. And this is really simple for me. Let's take the logo, the jersey, let's take the name Alabama out of this equation. And then I tell you, okay, we have a team that's been amongst the best in the country that is now going through a massive change in culture and coaching. And culture is a huge part of why I mentioned this. I had the chance to hang out with Kalen DeBoer a little bit at the national championship game for Yahoo Sports. And I talked to him, all the players talked to me about the fact that he doesn't yell, for example. It's just a very clear, never yell. So I asked him, I said, is that real? And he said, yeah, as a general rule, of course, never is a hard word, but as a general rule, I don't want to treat players that way. I don't want to have that type of conversation. I want to control my emotions so that I can ask them to control theirs. I think about that, and I think about what a difference that is going to be for every kid in that locker room. And adapting to a new culture in a stacked SEC is something that I don't take for granted. Also, as good as Washington was last year, Kalen DeBoer, like, this hire made sense, right? You hired the reigning coach of the year. The coach of the year also had the 8th overall pick at quarterback, right? And a top wide receiver and an offense that was absolutely spectacular with an offensive coordinator that's now in the NFL. Like, everything came together for Washington in a really amazing, beautiful way. I take nothing away from that. What that means to the SEC to me is nothing, because what he's going to be facing in the SEC is so wildly different. So now you have a culture and a coach that's new with a team that's lost a lot of players that's going to have to find their footing in an SEC that I think is more stacked than ever. If you do not have your best on any given Saturday, you will lose. So it's not that I think Alabama is going to be bad. I don't think they're going to make the college football playoff. I think they're going to eat 3 or 4 losses throughout the course of the year. And Alabama fans are going to have to adjust to the fact that this is part of the transition into a new era. This is not Nick Saban's Alabama anymore.
Yeah, welcome to where everyone else has been living for the entirety of their college football fandoms.
Yeah.
And oh yeah, by the way, Kalen DeBoer, welcome to the SEC, because your first conference game is Georgia.
Right.
So have fun.
Have fun with that.
I will take your Alabama is overrated and raise you Alabama's adequately rated.
Okay.
They're not overwhelming. They're not underwhelming. They're just whelming. They are getting the right amount of love that I think that they deserve. And this is why. It's interesting talking about Alabama with anyone, with fans, with college football insiders, anybody that loves college football. They reside on one side of the spectrum. One side is Alabama still has Nick Saban's players. Alabama still has an incredibly talented roster. Alabama still has Jalen Milroe, who's going into the season as a Heisman hopeful. Kalen DeBoer has won everywhere he's been, so we expect Alabama to be right back in the national championship conversation. The other side of it is, you also lost a lot of talent in that roster. Caleb Downs, safety at Alabama, one of the best defensive players in the country. He entered the transfer portal. He's heading to Ohio State. You lose your right tackle in J.C. Latham on an offensive line that was below average at best last season. Yeah, not great. That you lose Nick Saban and players aren't going to commit to Alabama at the rate that they were in the past because you don't get that Nick Saban discount in the NIL front. All of those things are true. Like, anything that I just listed, anywhere you are on that side of the spectrum or however you want to argue Alabama, those things are true. You probably might take a little bit of a step back because Nick Saban's not your head coach, but you also have a really talented roster. I don't think that the mass majority of college football fans are saying that Alabama is a lock in the national championship game like maybe they were in the past. I think 10-2 and 9-3 is a kind of the expectation for Alabama. I think that's a very fair expectation for Alabama. So if you take both sides of the spectrum and you kind of put them together in a blender and, put them all together, you really get the average of what I think is really the truth about Alabama. Not one side of the spectrum, but probably somewhere in the middle.
The only thing I'll add to your deficiencies of Alabama that you didn't list that I think is important, and I'll never forget our buddy Mike Golick Jr. talked about losing a national championship game to Alabama. One thing he said that sticks in my head is the minute Bama walked off the bus, he knew they'd lost. because they had such intimidation. When they walked off the bus, you looked at it and thought, damn, that's Bama. I don't know how we beat them.
Yeah.
I don't know where that swagger comes from. Like, because that was so much of that was Nick Saban. Like, I had the opportunity when we were all at ESPN to interview Nick Saban. One of the rare times in my life, the first time I interviewed him, that he sat down and I felt intimidated. Like, he just had a presence.
Yeah.
I think he was that +1 to everything, like just a little tick up to everything. They lost that. So I'm with you. I think if we're talking about 2 losses, then maybe that is adequately. Or if we're talking about 2 losses, I should say, then that's too high of an expectation. 3 to 4 losses is kind of where I think they sit. I will say, for adequately rated, 2 programs that we know a lot about, but I think are getting a lot of love, and rightfully so. Oregon, Ole Miss. And it's time right now to have a new conversation about Oregon and Ole Miss, because Oregon is stacked. Let's just start there. Oregon is stacked. They're stacked not only talent all the way across the board. I love their head coach. I love their coaching staff in general. They obviously have Nike money, so NIL's been no issue. But I also love the fact that they have a quarterback that's 4,732 years old. Like, that's just Dylan Gabriel coming in and playing.
Welcome to college football nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, but that's the thing. Like, and there are college football quarterbacks playing this year that have been in college football for 7 years because of COVID. It provides a different opportunity. And look, when we're talking about natties now, you don't have to win your conference. You just, Harry Douglas always said, get in the dance, you got a chance. All you have to do is get in the college football playoff. So if I got one game, and that one game is going to be a quarterback that, 8 months ago was worried about a promposal, or a quarterback that's been playing in the league and is now a grown-ass man still playing college football, I trust that grown-ass man. I don't think Dylan Gabriel's a world beater, but what did we see last year with Bo Nix, right? What did we see with Michael Penix Jr.? You see some of these guys in their last spot take a big step forward because they've just seen so much football. So I think for that reason, I trust Oregon. And for the same reason with Jackson Dart and with Ole Miss, like, Ole Miss is legit this year. They are a national championship caliber football team. So those 2 teams being so highly rated to me makes sense.
Whenever people talk about those 23, 24-year-old college quarterbacks as old, nothing makes me want to go sprint to like a skincare store and get night cream and eye cream, because it makes me feel like a big old meemaw when we're talking about the 23-year-old old guy.
I am old enough to very easily be all of their dads. Like, that's the thing. Like, I realize I'm great genetics. I don't look it, but come on. But I'm old enough to be their fathers, and I'm sitting there saying they're too old to play college football. So I hear that, yeah.
But it's a very fair argument that a guy that's played 3-4 years at a very high level in college football, they are equipped to handle things, especially early in the season versus maybe a first or second year guy who's getting to start for the first time. When we talk about overhyped, underhyped, I also think there's a really important conversation about underhyped. And this is the perfect time, I think, to bring up, as we started the show talking about all of these changes in college football. All of those changes also incorporate conference realignment, that we are going to get conference games that feel like national championship matchups. Like, we're going to get Big Ten on Big Ten matchups that feel like playoff games. Like, we are going to get Texas and Georgia in the regular season. That's awesome. Like, that is what I'm super fired up about. But when we talk about underrated aspects of this upcoming season, I think we need to talk about schedules. And I'm talking about Georgia's schedule, that we have gotten as a college football society equipped to just say, oh, that's a hard schedule. That's fine. Georgia can handle it. Oh, you lose these players to the transfer portal. You miss out on a couple of 4 and 5 stars. It's fine because it's Georgia. And that it'll just be plug and play. You lose a player, to injury. That's fine. They'll be able to replace that player. Well, Georgia's schedule is an absolute gauntlet. When we talk about hard schedules, Florida is probably the first team that comes to mind because they've got to murder Israel. It's
impossible.
Like,
Billy Napier, sorry about your job, man. Not your fault.
T's and P's, thoughts and prayers. Shout out to the real estate agent that might be putting that house up on sale in Gainesville coming up soon. But Georgia's schedule doesn't get talked about enough, I don't think. And it's because it's that Georgia benefit of the doubt. They opened the season against Clemson. We don't talk about that game very much. We talk about a lot of these other great non-conference Power 5, Power 4 matchups. We don't talk a lot about Clemson and Georgia, which a couple of years ago would have been a national championship game. They play Texas, as I mentioned. They go on the road in some really tough places this upcoming season. We're not talking about Georgia's schedule enough. I still think that Georgia isn't just a playoff contender, a national championship contender, but if they have a couple of bumps and bruises along the way just because it's such a hard schedule, I frankly would not be surprised.
You mentioned Texas there when you're talking about schedule, and I think that's an important part of this conversation too, because Texas and Oklahoma both come into the SEC. Oklahoma's schedule, wild. Texas, not. Right? So the funny thing
Which is crazy because Texas plays Michigan and Georgia.
Yeah.
And it's like, Cupcakes.
But compared
Ain't
to
no problem.
compared to what Oklahoma's dealing with, like what's funny to me is that in 1 year, 3 year, 5 years, we're going to sit back and we're going to be like, well, who adjusted the quickest to the SEC without any context to what that journey looked like. Like I just mentioned Billy Napier laughingly, and I'm never laughing about a coach losing their job, but the Florida Gauntlet this year, stupid.
It's stupid.
And that's, that's just part of what we have to start to acknowledge. Like this isn't the NFL where in a 17-game season, every team in the same division plays 14 of the same opponents. So you really have some normalization. College football is going, and this year becomes a real test for that. How does the committee reward tough schedules? How does the committee punish easy schedules? Because if they let a team like Notre Dame that basically plays a bunch of cupcakes in one tough game, if they let Notre Dame walk their way into the college football playoff while penalizing a team like Oklahoma for losing tough games, it's going to only incentivize everybody else in college football to not schedule anybody, right? So like that becomes part of the unprecedented conversation here.
And I think you bring up a fair point about some of the lighter schedules. I think Florida State has a pretty light schedule. Missouri has a fairly light schedule. Two teams that could find themselves in the college football playoff. How does the committee weigh wins versus strengths of schedule? If you have one tough game on your schedule and you drop that game, but you beat 11 not very good teams, like how does the committee kind of translate that into, are you one of the 12 best teams in the country or are you not?
Which is a reminder that the committee this year still matters. I think we forget that. The committee matters. I'll give you another under-talked about portion of this that flies in the same conversation range. And to me, it's new expectations. Because I think this year we need to be focused more on what happens to the middle class of college football. And by middle class, no offense to these programs. I'm talking about Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan State, even schools like Auburn, Florida, Tennessee, an area, well, I think Tennessee's going to have a very good year. But you start to look up and down some of these power conferences, teams that most years are bowl eligible and every once in a while had a shot at the college football playoff. For teams that, maybe we could get into the Big Ten championship game and surprise the world, where with the Big Ten no longer having conferences and simply being a seeding process, it is going to change the expectation for teams like that. Like, I feel like the tougher schedule combined with the gauntlet that they face, combined to the tougher path to the playoff, you're going to see schools like Michigan State suddenly losing 5-6 games a year if they don't get better. If all they have to do, if Michigan State is exactly who they are for the next several years, they're not going to be relevant in the country anymore. You have got to find a way for all of this middle class. Like, fans are going to have to readjust their expectations. Coaches are going to have to readjust how they do business, and they're going to have to figure out how to outspend, out-recruit, out-NIL, out-transfer. It's a total different world. So I wonder if we're going to start the process now of seeing the middle class become even thicker in college football. And that middle class, like, that means fan bases are going to have to adjust wildly. Like, you can't sit here and yell at your coach and say, what the hell are you doing? If you look around and say, yeah, but we don't have the same facilities. We don't have the same NIL money. We don't have the same transfer capabilities. We're not that team anymore. That's going to be a weird adjustment.
Fans are not going to adjust their expectations.
Well, short is nothing.
Just going to give you a little bit of a peek behind the curtain. Fans never have fair expectations, but it's a very good point because there are a lot of programs out there. I think Penn State comes to mind
that's a good call.
A program that can go 10-2 every single year. And yeah, fans want more and fans might get frustrated, but they can live with going 10-2 and going to a New Year's Six bowl. The playoff is expanded. Now there might be some fan bases. I'll use my alma mater. LSU fans expect to get into a 12-team playoff every single year. Well, realistically, over the last few years, LSU only would have gotten into one. And that was in 2019, the year that LSU won the national championship. That these fan bases are going to expect to get into an expanded playoff because there's more seats at the table. When it might be even more heartbreaking and heart-wrenching, and the seats might get hotter and hotter over time whenever you miss out on the playoff when there are still more seats at the table. And I think patience will run more and more thin the more and more the playoff inevitably expands.
And you're just going to eat more losses. Like, if Oregon and USC continue to recruit to the level that they can and continue to put up good teams, the Big Ten, that just adds more tough opponents. Sorry, Washington and UCLA, no disrespect, but a little disrespect. Like, there is some element here of, like, with the SEC the same. Like, there's certain rivals that everybody's grown up and you're like, well, that's going to be a tough match. Well, now you've added Oklahoma and Texas. And guess what? They're not going to stop spending money. They're not going to stop trying to be great. So it also, not only does it make the path tougher, I just think it adds a loss to a lot of teams on the win-loss column at the end of the year. And that's when you're already facing, if you're Alabama and you're already looking at it saying we got to take on all of these great teams, now we have to add Texas and Oklahoma to that list. It's more losses means less playoffs means more chaos, and that's why I'm going to love this show all year.
But more playoffs means more good games, and we are here for it all season long. So the great thing is, Fitz, today we have it all figured out. We know exactly who's going to be good, we know exactly who's going to be bad, and we know the outcome of the season. Psych.
I mean, Brenneman could have
Psych.
chimed in. Adam?
Adam, like seriously, we are carrying this show on our shoulders.
Can we font him? Can we just put Adam Brenneman on the bottom? Okay, I'm asking too much now.
So we've got everything figured out until week 0 kicks off, and we see these beautiful, wonderful Hawaii-Delaware State matchups, and it's going to completely change our minds about the rest of the season, and we are here for it, and we will be here for you all season long. Check us out, the College Football Power Hour, the official debut on Tuesday, August 27th, wherever you get your podcasts, on Yahoo Sports YouTube channel and yahoosports.com all season long. He's Jason Fitz. I'm Caroline Fenton. This right here is Adam Brenneman. He looks fantastic today. We will see you guys on Tuesday and all season long.